You're about to discover the chilling true story of America's most haunted hotel, where a dying man built a paradise that became a playground for the dead. This isn't fiction. Every word you're about to hear actually happened at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. And by the end of this documentary, you'll understand why even horror legend Stephen King left this place trembling. Picture this. It's 1903, and a skeletal man steps off a train in Colorado. His name is Freelan Oscar Stanley, inventor of the Stanley steamer automobile that once held the world speed record at 127 miles per hour. But speed means nothing to a dying man. At 5'11", he weighs just 118 pounds. His doctor has given him 6 months to live. Tuberculosis is eating him from the inside out, and he's travelled west, not to recover, but to die somewhere beautiful. The mountain air of Estes Park greets him like medicine from heaven itself. Within weeks, something impossible begins to happen. Stanley starts gaining weight. His cough subsides. By summer's end, he's hiking 5 miles a day. The man sentenced to death has been given a second chance at life, and he gains nearly 30 pounds that first summer. This wasn't supposed to happen. His doctor had already made plans to come in September to bring his body back to Massachusetts for burial. But Stanley doesn't just recover. He thrives. The valley that saved his life becomes his obsession. He falls madly in love with Estes Park and vows to return every summer. And here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Stanley's wife Flora wasn't exactly thrilled with roughing it in log cabins. She wanted elegance. She wanted civilization. So Stanley, being the genius inventor he was, decided to build both. If the mountain could give him life, he'd give the mountain luxury. In 1907, construction begins on what would become the Stanley Hotel. And get this, Stanley didn't just build a hotel. He built an entire hydroelectric plant on the Fall River to power it. He gave electricity to the whole town of Estes Park, charging residents only for light bulbs, not the actual power. Street lights? Completely free. This wasn't just a businessman building a resort. This was a grateful man trying to share his miracle with the world. The hotel opened on July 4th, 1909, and it was unlike anything the Colorado wilderness had ever seen. The Stanley Hotel wasn't just impressive, it was impossible. Imagine you're a wealthy East Coast socialite in 1909, and someone tells you about a luxury resort 25 miles from the nearest railroad station, sitting 7,500 feet up in the Rocky Mountains. You'd think they were pulling your leg. But there it stood, gleaming white against the mountain backdrop, looking like someone had airlifted a piece of Newport, Rhode Island, straight into the Wild West. The hotel cost over $500,000 to build, which in today's money would be well over $15 million. Every piece of lumber had to be hauled up the mountain by mule-drawn wagons. The granite for the foundation was quarried from a nearby property and dragged to the construction site. And somehow, impossibly, they did it. They built a 140-room Georgian revival masterpiece, always in the middle of nowhere. But here's what made jaws drop. While other Colorado hotels were still using outhouses, the Stanley had running water and modern bathrooms in every room. It had electricity when most of America was still using candles. It had telephones when making a phone call was considered futuristic. It had a uniformed staff that looked like they'd stepped out of a European palace. Guests even arrived in style, riding in Stanley's own fleet of modified Stanley steamer mountain wagons. The guest list read like a who's who of American royalty. The unsinkable Molly Brown, who survived the Titanic, stayed here. So did President Theodore Roosevelt. The Emperor and Empress of Japan visited in 1994. March King John Philip Sousa performed at the grand opening. This was the place where America's elite came to pretend they were roughing it while actually living better than they did back home. And Flora Stanley, FO's wife, would entertain guests by playing her prized 1904 Steinway piano in the concert hall. But fame is funny. The Stanley Hotel hosted presidents and emperors, survived economic downturns and changing times. Yet, it took a struggling horror writer and a nightmare to make it immortal. Which brings us to the autumn of 1974, when everything changed. The hotel that saved F.O. Stanley's life was about to save itself, thanks to a man who checked in looking for inspiration and checked out with the plot for one of the most terrifying novels ever written. October 1974. The Stanley Hotel is a shadow of its former glory. The paint is peeling, the grandeur has faded. Modern hotels with heating and air conditioning have stolen most of the business. The place is on its last legs, and everyone knows it. In fact, they're about to close for the winter. The staff is packing up. The restaurant is serving its final meals. And into this dying hotel walks a young author named Stephen King with his wife Tabitha. King is working on a novel called The Stand, and he's hitting a wall. He needs inspiration. He needs isolation. Someone suggests Estes Park. The Kings arrive at the Stanley to discover they're checking in on the hotel's last night of operation for the season. The building is practically empty. The hallways echo with nothing but wind and their own footsteps. They're given room 217, the presidential suite, and they are literally the only guests in the entire 140-room hotel. After dinner at the empty restaurant and drinks at the deserted bar, the Kings retire to their room. And this is where things get strange. King falls asleep and has one of those nightmares so vivid, it feels more real than reality. In his dream, his 3-year-old son is running down the hotel's long, empty corridors. Behind him, a fire hose has come to life, uncoiling like a snake, chasing the screaming child through the maze of hallways. King watches in horror, unable to help, as his son flees from this impossible predator. He jolts awake, drenched in sweat. His heart is pounding. The nightmare is so vivid he can still see it playing behind his eyes. He gets up, steps onto the balcony, and lights a cigarette. And there, in the cold mountain air, looking out over the sleeping town of Estes Park, the entire plot of The Shining comes to him. By the time he stubs out that cigarette, he has the bones of what will become his third novel and first bestseller. But here's the truly creepy part. King later said he felt something in that hotel, something that wanted its story told. And tell it, he did. The Shining was published in 1977 and became an instant phenomenon. Stanley Kubrick's 1980 film adaptation, while King hated it for its inaccuracies, made the story even more famous. The Stanley Hotel, which was weeks away from being demolished, suddenly had a new lease on life. Tourists came in droves. Everyone wanted to see the real place that inspired one of horror's greatest masterpieces. And in 1996, King got his revenge on Kubrick by producing his own miniseries version, filming it right there at the actual Stanley Hotel. The place that gave him nightmares had saved itself by becoming America's most famous haunted hotel. Now we need to talk about why Stephen King had that nightmare. Because the Stanley Hotel doesn't just look haunted. According to hundreds of guests and staff members over the decades, it actually is. And the most famous haunted room in the entire building is the exact room where King slept. Room 217. And the reason that room is haunted involves an explosion, a near-death experience, and a chambermaid who apparently loved her job so much she never quit, even after dying. It's the early 1920s. The hotel is still relatively new. A massive snowstorm is approaching Estes Park, and the staff knows what's coming. When storms hit the mountains this hard, the power goes out. So the head housekeeper, a woman named Elizabeth Wilson, begins her nightly routine. She walks through the hotel lighting acetylene gas lanterns in each room, providing backup light for the guests. What Wilson doesn't know is that there's a gas leak on the second floor. Acetylene gas is seeping into the hallway and filling room 217 like an invisible bomb waiting for a spark. She opens the door, steps inside, and strikes a match to light the lantern. The explosion that follows is so massive it destroys approximately 10% of the hotel. Witnesses reported seeing a bathtub fly through the air. The blast rips through the second floor above the main dining hall, blowing a hole straight down to the first floor. Elizabeth Wilson, holding that lit candle, is at the centre of the explosion. The force launches her from the room's entrance all the way down to the dining hall below. By all rights, she should be dead. The doctors think she's dead. But somehow, miraculously, she survives with nothing more than 2 broken ankles. After recovering from a coma, she returns to work in 1913. And here's where it gets wild. Elizabeth Wilson works at the Stanley Hotel for the next 37 years, finally retiring in 1950. She lives to the remarkable age of 90, dying peacefully in her home in Estes Park. That should be the end of her story. But guests staying in room 217 started reporting something strange. Their luggage would be unpacked and neatly organised when they returned to the room. Unmarried couples sleeping together would wake up with an invisible force wedging them apart, pushing them to opposite sides of the bed. Male guests would wake to find their bags packed and placed outside the door, as if someone disapproved of their behaviour. And staff members reported seeing a spectral woman in an old-fashioned maid's uniform walking through the door of room 217, which is physically impossible unless you happen to be dead. F.O. and Flora Stanley poured their hearts into this hotel. It saved his life. It became their summer paradise. It was the physical manifestation of a miracle. So maybe it's not surprising that when they died, in 1939 and 1940 respectively, they apparently decided to stick around. F.O. Stanley is most often seen in the billiard room, which was his favourite hangout when he was alive. Tour groups have reported seeing him materialise behind visitors, tipping his hat and smiling before vanishing. Bartenders in the hotel bar have spotted him strolling through in his old-fashioned suit, walking toward the kitchen. When they try to follow him, he simply disappears. His face has been seen in mirrors throughout the lobby, and once, bizarrely, his image appeared to be burned into an American flag that was gifted to the hotel. He's a friendly presence, just checking on his investment, making sure the staff is doing their jobs. But Flora is the more active spirit. She absolutely loved music, and her passion apparently transcends death itself. Her 1904 Steinway piano still sits in what's now called the 217 Wine Bar. And late at night, when the hotel is quiet, guests and staff report hearing classical piano music drifting through the halls. They investigate and find the music room empty, but the piano keys are moving on their own, playing complex melodies with invisible fingers. Some witnesses have actually seen Flora sitting at the piano bench, playing one of her favourite songs before fading away, and Flora has a bit of a temper about her piano. Several guests have reported touching the keys without permission and receiving a sharp shock, like a static electricity zap, except the piano is made of wood. Others have had the heavy keyboard cover slammed down on their fingers as if someone was annoyed they were touching her instrument. One tour guide reported feeling physically ill whenever she went near the music room, as if Flora didn't appreciate her presence. Then there's Paul, a former security guard who enforced the 11 p.m. curfew in the hotel's early days. He still takes his job seriously. Guests and construction workers in the concert hall have reported hearing a stern voice telling them to get out late at night. One worker felt someone repeatedly nudge him while he was repairing the floors, pushing him toward the exit until he finally left. But Paul is also playful with tour groups, reportedly flickering flashlights on command when ghost hunters ask him to communicate. So why is the Stanley Hotel so haunted? Paranormal investigators have theories. Some say it's the tunnels beneath the hotel, which create electromagnetic fields that spirits can use as energy. Others point to the hydroelectric plant that F.O. Stanley built, suggesting the electricity itself might power paranormal activity. Some believe it's the limestone in the building's foundation, which is thought to store and replay emotional energy like a recording. But maybe the real answer is simpler. Maybe the Stanley Hotel is haunted because it's a place where people were truly happy. F.O. Stanley came here to die and found life instead. Flora Stanley played her piano for adoring audiences and felt joy. Children ran through the halls and laughed with pure freedom. Elizabeth Wilson loved her work enough to return to it even after a catastrophic explosion. These weren't people trapped by tragedy. These were people who found their paradise and chose never to leave it. The hotel has been featured on Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, and countless paranormal television shows. It offers ghost tours, complete with electromagnetic field readers and ghost hunting equipment. You can book the Ghost Adventure package and stay on the 4th floor with all the tools you need to hunt for spirits. The hotel has essentially embraced its haunted reputation, turning what could have been a curse into its greatest asset. And here's something fascinating. The ghosts at the Stanley are rarely malevolent. They don't try to harm people. They play pranks, sure. They make noise. They move things. They separate unmarried couples in bed because apparently even ghost chambermaids have standards. But they're not evil. They're just people who loved this place so much they became part of it forever. F.O. Stanley. Checking on his guests. Flora playing her piano. Children running and playing like children do. Today, the Stanley Hotel is more popular than ever. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. It hosts weddings, conferences, and concerts. It has multiple restaurants, a spa, and those spectacular mountain views that first captured F.O. Stanley's heart. People come from around the world, some hoping to see a ghost, others just wanting to stay in the hotel that inspired The Shining. Either way, they're walking through a living piece of American history where the line between the living and the dead seems just a little bit thinner than everywhere else. The Stanley Hotel saved a dying man's life in 1903, and that dying man built something so special that even death itself can't make people leave. That's not a ghost story. That's a love story. It just happens to have ghosts in it. Image Generations.